Okay, so I wanted to introduce Kelsie to you as our speaker tonight. This is Kelsie Abrams, and she is the fossil preparator and fossil lab manager at the Burke Museum up in Seattle. She's been doing fossil preparation for about 15 years, and she was at the South Dakota School of Mines and the manager there, and then she came to Seattle about 8 years ago, correct? 6. I was pretty close. She has worked on some amazing different fossils that she's going to talk about today, and she's worked with some really interesting people. As you can look around at ourselves, we are very interesting people. So she's worked with a lot of us, or people like us. She also coordinated the last year's annual meeting of the Association of Materials and Methods of Paleontology at the Burke, and she said that it was the best one ever. So and a couple of our different people went to that, so that's pretty awesome. In her spare time, she likes to prep fossils. So she'll go back in on Friday. She works Sunday through Thursday, and she'll go back in on Friday just to volunteer her time to prep more fossils. But in addition to that, she also is an avid orchid grower. So she's going to give us a talk today, and welcome. We're very happy to have you.
One moment, because we're struggling to share the slide with our online.
Yeah, I don't. Here's a clip if you want. Perfect. Thank you.
I had to be complicated with the Google thing.
Yeah, it's okay.
I think I downloaded the PowerPoint too if it doesn't work.
I got you. I got it.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
I'm gonna have to figure out the clip.
before we do it, can somebody online just say, yeah, we can see it?
Yeah, it's right here. Yeah. Elena,
Oh,
don't check
okay.
it. That's how we just.
Okay. And then this, so it's on the screen.
Can everyone hear me on there okay?
One person needs to say, yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I think you can move the mouse down and use the bar.
Mouse down and use the bar. Oh, because the bar's there. Gotcha.
Maybe say it.
Just leave it.
What thing? I can't understand. You're asking.
Bar.
The bar.
I don't know.
Don't worry
Does
about
it go away?
Yeah.
Just let it go. Let it go.
It says it's full screen. I'm not sure what the problem is.
Aaron, you can click more and do hide floating meeting controls.
Oh my gosh. Not really. Click over here. Now I'm not taking it right.
Okay.
My apologies.
Let it go. Just let it go.
I'm not familiar.
Let go. Let go.
Okay, we'll leave it.
We need to get back.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you have a clicker or do I say next slide? What do I want?
You can do it either way. You can hit the space bar,
Okay,
which is the easiest thing to do.
cool. Okay.
I would just hit space bar. And just let it go.
Okay.
So you can do that, and you guys can go sit down.
Enjoy. Thank you so much.
Yes, no problem.
Okay, I hope everybody can hear me okay over there. I'm gonna move so you can see me. Trying to figure out how to do this. Okay, hi, thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be here. I don't know how they can see me. Gotcha. I'm excited to be here. I got to come to Portland, I think 2 years ago for about 2 days. So I have an excuse to come down here and see some more Portland, and I got to meet a lot of you. I've been Facebook friends with multiple people here that I've never got to actually see in person. So it was exciting to see people in person. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about what is fossil preparation and what does it look like from an academic research institution. It might look a little bit different than what you might do at home or as a hobbyist. Fossil preparation is kind of the wild, wild west. There's no standards, there's no degree. What you learn is usually dependent on the person who taught you or how good your Google forum skills are. And the things people recommend you on forums aren't always great. So I'm going to talk about the hopeful future direction that a lot of fossil preparation is going to go into, and then I'll share some fossil stories along the way as well. So I come from the Burke Museum in Seattle, Washington. We opened up our new building in 2019. I can't remember now. It was 6 months before the pandemic hit, which was great because we were closed for 9 months and could finish our exhibits that we didn't have finished by the time we opened up our museum. So if you get a chance to come up there, get in contact with me. I'll give you the whole back scene tour. We only get half of one floor, so our fossil exhibit is much smaller than I would prefer, but we have a ton of really cool fossils, including the tough slug Tyrannosaurus Rex skull. This is the best T-Rex skull in the world. And I'm not saying that because I work there and I get to look at it. It literally is the best T-Rex skull in the world. There's almost zero deformation to the skull. We have every single bone of the skull, including the in situ or in place ear bones. Our T-Rex was looked at by Thomas Carr and included in one of his studies, and it's estimated to be between 19 and 20 years old, so it wasn't fully mature when it died. It's got multiple injuries to the face, and it's just the most fantastic, beautiful thing you've ever seen. You can go right up to it. You'll stand within a foot of it at the glass. If you contact me, I'll get you the hookup to actually touch the nose. That's the one cool thing I can do at my job is say, come touch my T-Rex. So beautiful T-Rex. Our in-house name is Elvira, because look at her. We don't actually know if it's a her. But we have a fantastic museum, and we do have a little bit of a specialty with the Pacific Northwest with our little Pleistocene display. We have a variety of Pleistocene animals that have been found in Seattle area, including mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed tigers. The sloth right there is real. That's the SeaTac sloth. They hit it with the bulldozer at SeaTac Airport. So some fun fossils. And it is my mission in life to explain to non-paleo and paleo people parts of my job and how it can impact them and get a greater appreciation for the fossils that you see on display, and then also get you curious and nerdy about the things that you do to your fossils. When I go into a museum, I have a different experience than a lot of people do. So when I walk up to a fossil exhibit, I don't spend 30 seconds looking at it going, ooh, cool, snapping a selfie and moving on. That's what most people do in a museum, at least the ones I see come through the Burke. I have a glass window. I watch all of the guests and see what they do. They don't spend a whole lot of time with each fossil that they see. And when I come in and I look at something like that, I sit there and go, who dug it up? Who found it? What did they glue it together with? Who welded it together? How long did that take to put together? How much money and time and people did that? I'm thinking about the logistics to make that there so that someone can go enjoy it for 30 seconds and put a selfie on Facebook. So I'm trying to encourage people to understand the amount of work and labor and time and love and tears and blood that goes into making these kinds of displays. And then for those who do collect and dabble in fossil preparation, getting you to understand what you're doing and why, because a lot of us don't ask those questions, especially if you're me. In the beginning, you don't ask any questions, and it can bite you in the butt. So I like to break the entire field of paleontology down into 3 sections, and that's because I'm a fossil preparator. I'm the middleman. I'm the unknown force behind museums and research. You don't hear a lot about fossil prep. You don't see a lot about fossil prep. And again, it's because it's the Wild West. There's no standards. There are no degrees. It is everybody who's interested in it, who somehow stumbled into a job at a museum or does it at home in their free time or volunteers on their weekend to do it. But it is the most critical aspect of paleontology. I would argue that it is even more important than the field work, because it takes luck to find the fossil. It takes skill and talent and a lot of time and money to make a fossil pretty and come out of the rock. So I am that unseen, unknown middleman, but I'm not just the middleman. A fossil preparator or a materials and methods expert should have a part in every single aspect of paleontology. So as a materials and methods expert, I can go to the field and tell my students the reason that their plaster isn't setting up is because they have treated burlap, which stops plaster from setting up. They don't have that understanding. They just call me in a panic and say, Kelsie, my plaster is not setting up and it's 110 degrees and spend 3 hours. You know, I can explain what's going on and how to fix that and help them collect fossils better so that I don't have to deal with what they did in the field. The concept is garbage in, garbage out, right? So let's imagine our fossil is a beautiful, perfectly ripe banana. And that's when you find it. It's a beautiful, perfectly ripe banana. But in order to get that banana to the museum, you stepped on it and it sat in the sun and kind of little got brown. That's what I have to deal with. I'm not a miracle worker. There's only so much I can do to salvage it. And now when I pass off my squished banana to a researcher, there's only so much they can do with it. So each step in this process is a point where you can lose information about that specimen if it's mishandled. Every time it's damaged or you did something careless to it that you didn't even think about, you are removing data. And so a fossil preparator or a materials and methods expert can go help in the field to make sure that data is captured correctly and that we're not losing information about animals. And they can also go to all the way to the other end where they're informing researchers about what the researchers are doing to fossils and helping researchers having an understanding of why does that fossil look that way and how can their research and their results for their research be impacted. As a materials and methods expert, I read a lot of papers and I see a lot of method sections, and then I see a lot of results that they're not interpreting what they thought they were interpreting. And that's an issue because they don't understand what they did to that fossil or how that fossil came to them. And so I'm here to talk to anyone who will listen to me about things like Q-tips and polymers. So if we go and look at those three components of paleontology, I'm going to break them down real fast just so we're all on the same page. Fieldwork is that first part. It's finding the fossil. And a lot of people, that's the only thing they want to do. They don't want to research it. They don't want to prep it out of the rock. They just want to go hike around in 110-degree heat with bugs and rattlesnakes and find fossils. I don't like that part. That's why I'm a fossil preparator. Unfortunately, I still lead teams today, and I'll have 3 different digs that I run this summer across the United States. It kind of is the burden of my materials and methods spiel is I have to go teach people how to do it now. So I have to go out to these digs. But this is 2 of the different places that I get to work. The bottom, this beautiful Badlands. Gorgeous. That is Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona. I work there 2 weeks every year. I also prepare the fossils from there, and I'll show you some. And then up in the top, that is the poking out. That is the ischium. I think that's the ischium of a duck-billed dinosaur that I found several years ago. I'll show you the end result of that fossil as well. It's like the only cool thing I found was a chunk of a dinosaur pelvis. So beautiful lands, but that's the fun part is going out and finding the fossil initially. In leading crews, I'm making sure that education is my #1 priority. I'm making sure that we're collecting that fossil so that my life is not miserable in the lab, right? I want to make sure that we are collecting that in a very good way. And when I say my life's not miserable, I mean people like to shatter fossils when they remove them from the ground. And when they shatter them, those breaks weren't there a few years ago, and now they think Kelsey's going to puzzle together 14,000 pieces. I am, but I'm not going to enjoy it. So let's just not break it in the first place, and I can go out and teach people that. So on the left, I've got one of my crews a couple summers ago. We're working on a Triceratops dig that we finished the skull of the animal actually in this last year. I get the opportunity to take everyone out into the fields. And again, that's my spiel. Anyone who will listen to me, I will take you out with me. So I've got in the plaid, that is actually a BLM guy that we are roped into working at our site. And then I don't know if I can even point this out. I'm just gonna run up there. Right there, that's Catlin Schroeder. She might have written a paper on Tyrannosaurus niche ontogeny partitioning or something like that a few years ago that made a lot of headlines. That's a long way of saying Tyrannosaurus Rex doesn't have competitors because its only competitor is itself. And it took up all the different predator roles in the environment. She's the one that wrote that paper. So I dragged her out to go dig with us. So I get a lot of fun people to come out on our digs. And then the entire time I'm goofing off with other Tyrannosaur experts and digging up a Triceratops. I'm also talking extensively about plaster and how plaster chemical reaction works and when you should mix it and when you shouldn't mix it, because I like to tell my students that I am Santa Claus in the prep lab. I know exactly what you did. You cannot hide it from me, and I know everything that went wrong when that jacket comes in my lab. I know if you soaked your burlap or not. I know if you had bad burlap. I know if you put your plaster on old plaster and it delaminated. I know exactly what you did wrong, and I will tell you so that you can do it better, so that I don't spend 5 years puzzling a Triceratops skull back together, which I just did. As part of my eagerness to educate everybody on paleontology and what I do with my life, oh gosh, I gotta figure out how to do technology, which we might not get. Wake up now. Ah, there we go. Hopefully there's no sound. Oh God, no. How do I mute myself? Mute myself. Okay, I don't want you to hear that. I don't want to hear that part. So I made like 5 TikTok videos. Don't find my TikTok. There's literally like 5 videos and I don't know what I'm doing. But I like to goof off and take a lot of footage and show people what we do. I love jackhammers and they look really fun until you get a student to pick one up and it's 30 pounds and 100 degrees and they're like, no, I don't want to play with this. So that's actually moving an ornithomimid pelvis. This is digging at our Triceratops quarry. And so part of my mission to reach bigger audiences was making a whole 5 videos to put on the internet to try and encourage people to have an understanding of what we're doing. A lot of people don't understand what a dig means. They get out there and they think, oh, dinosaurs are gonna be real fun. And then I hand them a pickaxe and a shovel and say, you're gonna be moving rock for 10 hours a day for a week. And they go, what? And I go, it's a dig. What do you think you're doing? So now we're never just gonna get away from that. Okay. Did I skip anything? We're good. So you got to go find your fossil and hopefully collect it in a good way. And then that second step is where I come in predominantly, and that's the fossil preparation. So removing the fossil from the rock, that is my specialty. I am a micro prep specialist. I got my start 15 years ago in Jurassic sauropods. So the biggest animals that we had in North America, and then somehow ended up working on some of the smallest animals in North America, including like Cretaceous mammals. So this is some of my work that I've been doing in the last 10 years or so, and I'll talk plenty about that later. Again, with that mission to show all kinds of fun, nerdy things, I would make more videos doing time lapses. Oh, Lord. Well, you're just going to deal with that. Time lapses of my work. This is the only T-Rex tooth I found in my life. In 15 years. You know, I don't have the finder's luck. That's why I'm a fossil preparator. I also have a hate relationship with T-Rex. I think it's overrated and gets too much attention. I sobbed like a child when I found this. I broke down crying immediately, just, oh. Yeah, so I don't prep dinosaurs. My boss let me prep this one because I said I will quit if you don't let me prep that one out of the rock. So I go to dig them up. I don't actually prepare our dinosaurs. We have a Hell Creek fossil preparator and he preps all of our dinosaurs. And then moving on from our fossil preparation, we get to the end stage. And that is when the fossil is out of the rock and it's ready for research and or display. And I work very, very closely with Dr. Christian Sidor. He is my primary boss at the museum. And we work on African gorgonopsids and Permian and Triassic animals. And if you Google him, he's got 30 different Gorgon papers that came out in the last year. He collected a bunch of gorgonopsids in Africa 20 years ago, and that's how long it took him to publish everything, but he's cranking them out now. I will talk a lot about gorgonopsids because they're my favorite. And he likes to take photos of like this of me and then throw it on Twitter and not tell me. So, you know, but that is what I do for the Burke Museum is I dig up their dinosaurs, I train people on materials and methods and proper excavation and fossil preparation, and then I work in very close relationship with Christian on the animals that he is researching. But fossil prep was not where I wanted to end up. I wanted to be the next Dr. Christian Sidor. I didn't make it there, and there's some really good reasons on that. I noticed in my career trajectory, I saw some big, huge red flags, and we should address those before we move on. And I saw some room for improvement within the paleontological science that I thought I could make my niche educating people. And education is really my passion. I like to talk forever. I literally will talk till like 9 o'clock, so make sure you stop me. So I got my undergrad degree in archaeology. I'm not confused on the difference between archaeology and paleo, but the archaeologists wouldn't let me glue the shattered pots back together. They said, nope, it's not important to glue it back together. And I went, well, who will let me glue things back together? And that's the paleontologists. The good news is also there's way less mapping and stuff with paleontology, which drives me crazy. So I went into a master's of geoscience, looking at becoming the next Dr. Christian Sidor. And when you go into your master's of paleo, you have to pick what's your research? What are you going to publish on? And I was at Fort Hays State. We have a bunch of Miocene rhinos, so 15 million year old rhinos in Kansas. There are 2 different kinds. I thought, okay, I'll go look at the diet of these 2 animals. There's 2 giant herbivores that lived in the same environment. I'll go compare those two rhinos to black and white rhinos in Africa, which are two big rhinos that live together and have different diets. Slam dunk nature paper, bam, I'm gonna figure out which one is the white rhino equivalent, which one's the black rhino equivalent. No, I'm not. You can see there's nothing about diet in my actual thesis. So what is microwear? Microwear is one type of technique to figure out what animals ate. And so the whole summary and like the little nutshell is you look at scratches and holes on a tooth. If you blow it up under a microscope super close, you go and count all of that, you plot it on a chart, you compare it to modern animals, bam, and it'll fall out on a chart and it'll fall out as a browser, as a mixed feeder, or a grazer. Grazers are tall grass, lots of glass is actually in plants, so called phytoliths. So big phytolith plants, and then browsers would be your bush eating animals. So pretty simple, right? You go take some photos, count some stuff, plot it. You'll know exactly what they ate. When you go to sample these specimens, you go into the museum collection. I went to the Smithsonian to get samples, and I also went to Sternberg Museum in Kansas to get my samples. Those fossils in that collection, things have happened to them before you got them, right? They got collected in the field, and then I got prepared, and now it's in a drawer. And now I want to do research on that specimen. Well, there's no records for most museums historically on what they did to fossils. So when I go into the museum, I see this thing on the left, and I go, oh, that's covered in lots of yellow crystalline stuff. That's shellac. I have to learn how to identify what is on my tooth so I can figure out how to get it off, because all that shellac is on top of that tooth and I need to get to the enamel. Here's a clean jaw on the right, and you can see those beautiful white pearly edges of that lower molar. That's what I need to get. I need the surface to actually get those scratches in those pits, so I got to clean my tooth. So I figure out how to identify shellac. I got to learn how to get the shellac off, and then I can actually get to the dietary reconstruction of my animals. Going into my master's program, I'd only done field work and research. I hadn't really done too much preparation. But the good news is all of these papers on microwear have a method section which tells you how do you clean the tooth off. So great, they have the recipe. I can go figure out how to clean off the tooth. So I start going in through method sections. And technically, when you go to a method section of a paper, it's supposed to be an identical recipe. You do not want to change variables. You want to do the exact same thing that the previous person did so that you can compare your results to them. And then I started seeing all of them were doing different things. They were cleaning things with different ways, with different materials, and that's introducing more variables to the data. And they're not comparing the same things because they're processing these in different ways. They're also not looking into how that fossil came to them because they don't have the historical records. And so I started looking at this going, oh, we're adding way more variables. I'm just a little master's student. How am I going to screw up my thesis? I need to figure out which way is the right way to do it. And there's a lot of issues with a couple of these examples that I threw up here. So the first one, it says the surface of the tooth was cleaned using acetone. Like with what? Like a toothbrush, a cotton swab? Like how did you clean it? What do you mean by that? That's not a good method section. It's not helpful for me. So going to the next paper, they said they cleaned the tooth with cotton swabs soaked in ethanol. Those are two different solvents, acetone, ethanol. They have different drying speeds. They do different things to surfaces. Acetone's catastrophic and loves to destroy surfaces under a microscope. Ethanol is a little more gentle, but also they didn't tell me what kind of cotton swab that is. Not all cotton is created equal. Third one, getting there. I'm getting a little more information on how the heck I'm supposed to clean my rhino teeth. They say that they use shellac remover. They even told me the brand. They use Zip Strip. I can get that at Ace Hardware. Cool. They use cotton swabs, Q-tips on wooden stems, hospital non-sterile. Cool. And then they wiped it down with more alcohol later with cotton balls and then cotton swabs. So that's giving me a little more information, but there is a huge red flag right now. And the keyword or the red flag is cotton. Do you know what cotton is? So then you go down the rabbit hole on Google, right? You're like, they're all doing different things. How can this be a variable? Well, cotton is a polymer, which is like one of my favorite things ever. So cotton is the fluffy on top on the plant. That is a cellulose. It is a naturally occurring polymer. Polymer is a fancy way of saying chains of molecules, like repeating units of molecules. You're nodding. I shouldn't even talk about this around you. It's cellulose. It's not bad for a tooth in theory. that cellulose is attached to an actual plant. And within plants, part of the structure of the plant is phytoliths, which are those little glass crystals. And the whole theory behind this microwear is the rhino's eating grass with plants particles that are scratching the teeth and leaving holes. And then you're taking cotton and scrubbing the tooth. But you're like, wait, Kelsie, the cotton's just cellulose. They have to harvest that monstrosity on that left photo. And when you are harvesting that, you are kicking up the dead plant that has the phytoliths, those glass crystals. You're kicking up the dirt that has all the dead plants and quartz sand and all sorts of stuff. And it is contaminating that Q-tip or that cotton. And again, not all cotton is created equal. So you're like, well, they collected it, they'll clean it, it'll be fine. No. Do I have any like microscope or photography nerds in here? If you have a really expensive camera, you don't clean your lens with the Walgreens Q-tip, because you will know that Walgreens Q-tip has a chance of silica contamination. It's not purified. So if you have a fancy microscope or you have a fancy camera, do not grab that Walgreens Q-tip. There's a chance that there will be silica in it. And here we go. So on our left, we've got one random Q-tip from the box at Walgreens. Beautiful cellulose structure, great. On the right, another Q-tip from that box, and that's a big old silica crystal. So a lot of cotton doesn't come purified. And so when I read all those different methods of using cotton, cotton swabs, cotton, I'm going, you're not using sterile cotton. And you don't know if you just scrubbed your tooth with a grain of sand and removed and altered and made new data. You don't know what you just did. And there are hundreds of thousands of specimens across the world that multiple people have gone and scrubbed aggressively with cotton. And each time they did that, or sorry, the first person who did that burnt down that little mini Library of Alexandria. That tooth that had data that could have been data that tells us what that rhino ate, a bunch of people went and scrubbed with cotton. That was probably contaminated. And we haven't even talked about the acetone, the ethanol, or the shellac remover. So a lot of data just got obliterated permanently. These teeth, you cannot trust the surface of those teeth anymore. So that's kind of bad. Kind of bad. Can't really study microwear if they've screwed stuff up. The good news is if you are a microscope nerd or you're a methods and materials expert, you can get purified cotton. A lot of researchers didn't know that apparently when they just started grabbing random cotton Q-tips and scrubbing stuff. So when you're moving forward to clean your fossils and your teeth, you're looking for USP grade purified cotton. If it does not say USP, there is a chance of silica contamination. You get the USP grade, this is the kind of stuff that they're putting inside your body. It's purified, there's no silica. They're not gonna put medical grade or silica contaminated stuff inside your body. So that's an issue. That stuff existed. The researchers didn't know that. They didn't know what they were doing when they were scrubbing those teeth. And this isn't to shame anyone. This is an example of a lot of people are told to do something. They don't ask why, and they don't think about how it's going to impact them. What is this? It's the US, oh gosh. Sure. Okay. I was about to start talking about the pharmacopedia thing, but we're good. So in reading those methods papers, I kind of went, I don't think I'm actually reconstructing diet. I think I'm reconstructing someone's aggressive scrubbing of a tooth. And that's not even addressing the stuff that happened to the tooth before it came to me. So someone had to prepare that 100 years ago before they covered it in shellac. I don't know what they did to that. I don't know if they scrubbed it with a wire brush to get the chalk off of it. I have no clue how they have modified the actual surface of that tooth and what data has been lost. And that's not even talking about all the gunk and grit that's in there. If I try to clean that tooth, there's the gunk and grit that I have to remove, and there's the chance that that's going to score the enamel. It's just a nightmare. So I had to completely pivot. I couldn't look at dietary reconstruction. I couldn't actually trust that what I'm looking at is not me scrubbing my teeth with silica. And it's not to say that people haven't figured out how to clean those teeth correctly. There are so many papers on how to clean teeth without affecting the enamel, how to use solvent gels. You don't even have to scrub the tooth, right? How to clean them properly. This paper came out in 2011. There's probably 300 microwear papers that have come out since 2011 that are not using these methods. So people have been figuring out how to get data perfectly, how to make sure we're not damaging fossils, and that information in those papers are not moving on to the mainstream researchers that are the ones that are going to the Smithsonian and scrubbing their fossils with Q-tips. So there's a big lag in moving methods and materials towards research and getting researchers to understand what they're looking at and how their fossil preparator could have ruined their researcher or how they just ruined their own research. And that's a big issue. So I ended up looking at completely different things other than dietary reconstruction. I had to look at features of the rhino that weren't related to me scrubbing those teeth and someone else scrubbing those teeth. But what that did was made me recognize that big problem about materials and methods and not understanding how it affects research. And I, for my master's thesis, was testing a methodology. I wasn't doing dietary reconstruction. I was testing a method. And that made me not go into a PhD program because I went, this is where I'm going to go. I'm going to go test every methodology and let everyone know how they screwed up that fossil and how they did not come to the conclusion that they thought they came to. So I went straight into the methods and materials. And that's how I landed in the middle section. But again, materials and methods experts should be informing the field and the researcher. I lucked out. You might know this dude. I lucked out. So in fossil preparation, it's the wild, wild west. You don't go to a museum or a university and get a degree in fossil preparation. It's not a thing. Fossil preparation is typically, you're at home, you're on fossil forums, you're figuring it out yourself, or you apprentice to someone who knows what they're doing. I won the luck of the draw. I was born in Casper, Wyoming, which has the Tate Geological Center, and it's got this dude there. That's JP Gavigelli. He's talked for NARG, I think in 2022, I saw him on your website. He's my prep dad. He's probably almost as close to me as my actual dad. And he's from my hometown. And I went to the museum one day and went, "You're a fossil preparator, right? Can I volunteer for you?" And he said, "Sure." And that was a bad decision on his part because then I would not leave him alone. I was on his coattails going, "What are you doing now? Why are you doing that? What is this? I broke this. What do I do?" I bugged him like no one's business. And I learned so much. And then he got me both my jobs. I just had to name drop him. So it's who you know, and it's what they teach you. Most fossil preparators, the materials and the methods that they know, it's the person that they learn from that taught them those materials and methods. And again, that's good and bad because people don't always ask, why am I using that? And because it's the Wild West, you will see different materials at every single museum you go to. So the first museum I worked for, we were using super glue in the field and super glue in the lab. The second museum I worked for, I was gluing Allosaurus arm bones together with Elmer's glue. The third museum I worked for, they had this stuff called Boot Bar B72. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but you handed it to me, sure. The next museum, it was Paraloid B72. And every place they just said, here, use this. And I said, okay. And I watched everyone around me say, okay. None of us has said, why? Why aren't we using the other stuff, right? And I see that perpetuated in the field constantly. Hopefully, eventually that person gets to where I get, where they go, wait, how are we screwing this up? And then they go talk to someone else and go, oh no, I was doing everything wrong, but not everyone gets to that point. So JP taught me some stuff I don't do, but JP taught me a lot of amazing techniques, and networking was very helpful. So we're moving into the fossil preparation. What is preparation, right? So preparation is how you make an object useful. It's not very useful in the rock. And don't try and argue with me about CT. We're going to get to CT scanning. So it is procedures to make the object useful. So you can study it, you can see it, you can appreciate it. It is art and it is science. And we're going to talk a lot about that because the whole adding art to science can be very contentious. People don't like to add the two, but a fossil preparator is both an artist and a scientist. This is that duckbill dinosaur bone I found in the field. You were looking at the top end that I had seen in the field, and this is the finished bone and then going through the process on making an archival cradle. And so as a materials and methods expert working for the Burke Museum, everything that I use and do is archival quality material. So archival means it's not going to turn yellow, it's not going to fall apart in a year, it's not going to swell with heat and humidity. It's going to be good for 500 years or more. And the reason that is important is because 100 years ago, when all those dudes, Marsh and his friends, were slapping shellac on everything, they didn't know that the shellac was going to fail. They didn't know it was going to expand and contract and incorporate dust. They didn't know it was going to turn yellow. They didn't know that poor Kelsie, 100 years later, is going to spend hundreds of hours of her life putting together fossils from the exhibit that have fallen apart in their case because the glue is failing. They didn't know that. Now we know that, and we're spending our time and money fixing fossils losing more data. We don't want to do that to people in the future. So we are choosing techniques that will keep the fossil good as long as possible so no one else has to be miserable removing shellac. And then also that's preserving the data in that specimen. That thing lasted 66 million years before we got our hands on it, and then you're the one that broke it. Right, you don't want to do that. So I don't want to be responsible for losing data. I don't want to be that person that broke something after it lasted for so long. I want to respect that animal and respect the data and the science and respect what people are going to do with it in 100 years, because I don't know what science and technology we're going to have in 100 years. 100 years ago, they didn't know we were going to come up with CT scanning, so they were pumping all sorts of stuff inside of fossils, metal rods and glue and resin. And then we go and CT scan that, and like Santa go, oh no, what did you do here? They didn't know we could do that. I don't know what they're going to do in 100 years. I don't want to ruin their science experiment in 100 years. The people who cracked my rhinos 70 years ago ruined my science experiment. I don't want to do that to someone else. To be a fossil preparator, you kind of have to know everything, whether you want to or not. I failed chemistry. I will admit that. I know way more about polymers than college ever taught me. I have to know about microscopes. We use microscopes, and it is just a huge variety of tasks and tools to do my job correctly that I have to employ. And so on the left, one day I might be molding and casting and painting a cast of a 900,000-year-old salmon. That's Oncorhynchus snurka from Tacoma, Washington. That is my work. I molded and casted and painted that. Quite proud of it. So I might do that on one day. And then the next day I might be disassembling a whole bunch of microscopes for parts. So right here, that's a bunch of silica contamination on my microscope. That's a horrible, horrible thing. Don't ever do that. I'm pillaging for parts right now. Those are getting out of commission. So I had to learn all about microscopes and how to calibrate microscopes and clean microscopes and what is a focus arm. And those were not things I was thinking about in college, but now I have to employ that to be able to do my job, because if my microscope's not working, I'm going to spend 5 hours working on it and it's going to be frustrating. So you have to learn so many tasks to become a fossil preparator. There's no degree in this. It's really you asking people, bugging people, getting on the internet and talking to people in clubs like, how did you do that? I got to bug Bruce Steele today and be like, how'd you do that? Working for a museum is a little bit different than maybe hobby preparation. Because I am having to fix things that were worked on 100 years ago, that means I have to figure out what they did to it. There are no records from 100 years ago what they were doing in fossils. So now I have to figure out what is the stuff on the fossil, so I can figure out how to get it off, and I can also figure out, is it going to kill me in some sort of way to get it off the fossil. So I have to learn to become a Sherlock Holmes of unknown agents, and that's a whole other field in of itself. And so on the left, I have a cast of a giant bird that we have at our museum that children love to pull the toes off of. And so the kid broke the toe off, they brought it to me, I looked at that and I saw 5 different repairs, 5 different materials. And the thing was, they kept just slapping more glue on it and then sticking the toe back on. And by the time I got to that toe, the toe was sitting a full inch out further than it should be because of all the layers of glue. And all those layers of glue aren't bonding to each other, so it kept failing. So I went, well, that was incorrectly repaired. I went and took all that crap off, redid it myself. It's been fine for 5 years. No one just did it properly. Another thing that I do, because I've become a materials and methods expert and I focus on archival materials, is I go around the country and I do conservation reports for other museums. So in this one right here, gotta wake up my little mousy. This is a couple months ago, I went to San Bernardino County Museum to help them identify some of the things that had happened to their Pleistocene fossils. Ooh, that's horrifying. That's Elmer's glue. So the way you identify Elmer's glue is you get a toothbrush, you dip it in some water and you scrub, and if it foams aggressively, it's Elmer's. And their entire Pleistocene fossil collection was dumped with Elmer's. Elmer's is going to turn yellow and it's going to fail. And it can do a whole lot of things because Elmer's also has 400 different formulas that are proprietary and you don't know what was in it. So that's one thing I get to go do, is tell people how their life is going to be miserable now. Continuing in with identifying deterioration and fixing things for the future, you come up with lots of weird things. My favorite thing in the world is polymers, and my favorite polymer in the whole world is polyethylene glycol 3350. Laxative, right there. So if you ever go by Miralax, you'll see the chemical formula. It's got one thing in it. It's polyethylene glycol 3350. If you want to buy that through Dow Chemicals, the brand is Carbowax. They'll want to sell you a 50-gallon barrel for like $5 billion. And you're like, I'm not going to pay for that. I can buy the same stuff, generic laxative. I use it constantly. In that photo right now, you can see I've got a hand model right there. She's showing off toilet paper. We have a huge crack that's running underneath an orthonithymimid pelvis. You can see the bone is bridging that gap. We don't want bone to continue falling down in there. So we stuffed the crack with a whole bunch of toilet paper. We melted a bunch of laxative, dumped it in there to fill that entire crack, and that is a temporary gap fill. I can pull all of that out and pull all that wax back out. It's not going to cause any damage. I can hold that together for a little while. On the right, that is my child. She even has the same nickname as me as a child. That was Lulu. So shortly after I was hired, they gave me that thing up at the top. And it's not a very good photo. I didn't want to take too many photos of it, but that's the South Lake Union mammoth named Lulu. It looked like that at the top when they gave it to me. 500,000 pieces, like piano pieces, right? And they said, we need that on display for the museum opening. I went, oh. So then I spent 9 months of my life taking that blob up the top and making it look like it does on the bottom. So when I say 9 months of my life, that's why it's my child. But I had to sit there and think, how do I do that? It's completely shattered. And if you've ever seen a mammoth tusk in cross section, it's like ice cream cones, with just stacks of cones and stacks of cones. And when they break in a spiral of little keys. And then you have the key inner spiral, and then the next spiral, and then you have thousands of keys to put back together. So that's why I'm like, please don't do that to me. Collect it correctly in the first place. The other one is that was actual natural ivory too. So that was a whole other thing on figuring out how do you get ivory to stick together. Elmer's glue. Because I work in the museum, I'm also the person who gets to fix everything else in the museum because no one else can. So being that materials and methods expert doesn't mean I'm just stuck in paleontology. We don't have any other conservators in the museum. So when stuff like horseshoe crabs break, they come to me and say, Kelsie, you can fix the horseshoe crab. And I go, yeah, I can. But it's not my collection. It is a biological specimen. They might want to do DNA testing on stuff like that. I have to document exactly what I did to it, what I put on it, where, how, and then give those records to biology so that if someone wants to come take a chunk of that, grind it up, and do some weird chemical analysis, they don't go to the part where I put super glue and fiberglass on that. I want stable materials over time. I have to understand how are my materials going to age. That's reading a lot of really boring engineering papers. I also want safe choices because I don't want to die of anything scary like silicosis. And I also want to live forever like Bruce. So I am Bruce 2.0. Bruce Crowley was the previous preparator at the Burke Museum. He retired 6 years ago. Like me, I'm in there on my days off, and Bruce is retired and he's still there 20 hours a week. If you like fossil prep, you really like fossil prep. And so Bruce is in there right now working on a whale actually, and we are doing monitoring on the noise of those tools to see what tools are we legally required to have noise protection for, how loud are tools actually getting. My hearing's going from too many metal concerts. I kind of want to hold on to my hearing. When do I need to have the earbuds in? So we are monitoring the sound of Bruce's air tools in that. So I have to become the safety inspector, Safety Kelsie, figuring out what are all the different ways someone's going to get hurt in my lab and sue me, and how do I make sure everybody's really, really safe. I've mentioned those records. They were not keeping records a long time ago. If you are doing fossil preparation, even if it's for the stuff in your house, write it down somewhere. So in 20 years, you go, wait, what did I glue that with? You'll know you wrote it down. I require, since I've been hired at the Burke, to do fossil preparation paperwork for every single specimen. All of it is loaded into our database as well. There's multiple reasons to do this. One, we're tracking all the treatments. What are all the chemicals that we dumped on that fossil? How could they affect the fossil? And what are all the physical ways that we could have manipulated or changed that fossil, caused damage, things like that. Also, everyone who touched that fossil and worked on that fossil writes their name down. They go in our database. They will be acknowledged as someone who worked on that fossil. That's very important to acknowledge everyone who worked on that fossil. They contributed to that. Another reason you want to document things is because you can fool a researcher really, really, really well. I could do some really terrible things to Christian Cedar. I could make him publish a lot of things that he thinks are real, but they're not. And that's because I know what I'm doing. And I could fool the researcher because it's easy for them to not understand what's happening. And I need to document that, and I need to tell them exactly what happened. So on the left, we have another Oncorhynchus snorka. That's the real one that's on display at the museum, not the cast. But you'll see there's something weird going on with the middle of the head. There was an unfortunate accident before I was hired. That was our best Oncorhynchus snorka. The drawer fell. The fish went. They put it back together as best they could, but a chunk of the face was still missing. The good news was they had the original mold, so they could mold the chunk of the face that they were missing. I stuck the mold with the piece where they were missing that big old chunk in the middle, and then I painted it in the bottom. I don't know about you, but I think I did a pretty good job painting that. If you weren't sitting there tapping it and rubbing acetone on it, you might not know that that's not the actual fossil. I documented that heavily, with lots of diagrams, so whoever looks at that will know that's Kelsey's fake plastic chunk of the fossil skull. We're doing okay on time? Yes. Good question. So I stole that form from Jennifer Cavan at John Day Fossil Beds. She came up with that basic form, and I think everyone saw that form and went, "Ooh, I'll steal that form as well." So she came up with the basic format for the form. I edited it for the treatments that we use, and then we scan the file, and it goes. The actual piece of paper that scanned is uploaded to the file on our database. So if you type up that number in our database, the specimen information will pop up, and there will be an attachment with the prep notes. So it is all attached to our formal database. And then in like multiple Google Drives, because I'm afraid I'm going to lose it all. Where was I going? Selecting materials and methods that are appropriate for the intended use of the specimen. So if the researcher doesn't know how I'm going to script the fossil, I need to tell him how I'm going to script the fossil, and I need to know what they need to use that fossil for, so I can know what to do to it. So a good example would be if you're trying to get, I don't know, DNA or blood cells from a tyrannosaur femur that broke in half, you don't want to cover it with glue and chemicals, because that's going to ruin all of that. But if you don't know that, you're going to dump glue on that fossil, aren't you? Yeah. So I need to ask Christian, what are you doing with this so I don't ruin your research? So I'm in constant contact with the researchers so that I know exactly what we're doing. This is a gorgonopsid right here on the right. I know it does not look super great and fancy. You are looking at the skull turned sideways. You're looking up at the palate and the roof of the mouth. I was literally prepping that spot. So when a fossil gets to me, it's been 90% prepped by a bunch of other people. I'm the one reserved to spend my 20 hours on about this much of it and the most important part with my little needles. And so I was prepping out the pterygoid teeth of a gorgonopsid. Gorgonopsids are 250 million-year-old Permian animals from Africa and Siberia. They are proto-mammals. They're in the group of animals that are eventually going to become mammals. They had teeth on the roof of their mouth. It's freaky. We didn't really know about that because 100 years ago, when they were prepping these things with hammers and chisels, they took all the teeth off the roof of the mouth. Yep. We're learning a lot more about gorgonopsids now because of the fossils prepared in the last 20 years aren't wrecked like the ones they found a long time ago. I don't know. I can't stop that music. It was free, so it's whatever. Molding and casting, I have to understand that the silicone and stuff that I put on the fossil, that's a chemical, it's going to alter that fossil. I have to think about barriers so that the silicone doesn't infiltrate my fossil. I have to think about if I'm putting a fossil in silicone, how do I get the silicone off my fossil without destroying the fossil? And so I have to know so many things that I probably never really wanted to learn about, like how do I separate silicone and how do I keep silicone from not sticking to stuff? It sticks to everything, whether you want it to or not. And Legos, I love Legos. If Lego ever wants to like sponsor me, I use Legos as my reusable wall for molds. And yeah, let's see how fast it takes me. So that's an ankle bone of a gorgonopsid. Safety, I have to know about safety with all this stuff. Resin, that's bad stuff. I have to work with pressure pots. I have to make sure my pressure pot's not going to blow up in my face. And then I think those are both 2 casts. So I get to do a lot of different things, but that means you have to learn about all of that stuff. And because I'm a nerd about the material, I'm gonna go spend 30 hours looking at that one resin because I need to know how it's gonna impact stuff. Was that a question? Yes. So the Legos are the walls that I make for my molds because you can change the size and you slap a bunch of Vaseline on it and the silicone won't stick to it. You don't have to do the Vaseline move, but that's what I do. And yeah, it's a quick way that I don't have to keep buying other materials to create walls. Some of my coworkers, they use metal sheets or they'll use clay as their walls for their barrier to customize the size. I like the Legos. Legos get a lot more hits online for social media than the clay wall posts. People love Legos.
Share, like, if you come across the, hey, I've got this fast tip or whatever, how are you sharing that with other folks who have your job around the world? Like, is
Good
there-
question. There are forums, there are conferences, there are speaking events like this that I'll go to and talk to, whether they're my colleague or not. I will talk their ear off about polymers and tell them to put the super glue down. A lot of it's basically social media, throwing it into the void and hoping that you're going to get the targeted audience. Usually you're going to get the nerd who's going to be watching that kind of content. So hopefully you can find them. But a lot of it is physically going to that place, because depending on the person and their personality, they may or may not want to learn or change their techniques. People can get very attached to the skills and the techniques that they learned from the person who taught them. So, you know, JP teaches me certain techniques and someone tells me, don't do what JP did, and you get offended. You're like, well, why can't I do that? JP did it. There's that whole component. So a lot of it is just throwing it out into the space on the internet and then going physically and talking to people and engaging them and explaining to them why they need to change what they're doing or think about it a little bit more. Okay, materials and methods. So on the left, I mentioned briefly earlier, chemicals. Dump chemicals on something, you're chemically altering it permanently. And so we try not to do that if we don't have to. That chemical didn't exist on that fossil. When we add it, we are altering and manipulating and changing it, and we don't know how we're going to ruin someone's research in 100 years. From the lab management perspective, you're wasting money, right? Did the fossil need the glue? No? Then why'd you dump the glue on? You just wasted my acetone and my paraloid. Paraloid's expensive. So from a management perspective, I don't want you to use the material if you don't have to. On the left right there, those are the impressions left over from skin scales of a hadrosaur leg. We had a leg, articulated leg of a hadrosaur, foot and all, that has the skin impressions all down the leg. So cool because you can see how the sizes of the scales change, how the depths of the scales change, things like that. Initially, we were really, really hopeful that we had actual fossil skin and not impression. If we had actual fossil skin, we do not want to put any chemicals on that because we're going to want to go do a bunch of different kind of chemical analyses to see if this is actual fossil skin. We did have to make the decision to put glue on it at one point. This particular section right there, you can see there's like that dark section and then the white rock on either side. That dark section is the shininess and the sheen that our glue leaves on the surface. That area, you can see a bunch of cracks. It was very loose sandstone. You can see the grains of sand. They were starting to fall off and we were losing the detail of those scales. So we made the decision on that particular part to put glue on it. But we didn't do it everywhere because we want to still be able to take samples. Spoiler alert, we don't have fossil skin. Paraloid B72. And then I don't remember what the point of the one on the right is, other than that's an Antarctic amphibian that I spent probably 100 hours just exposing the head of. Right now, that is now at the Field Museum in Chicago. I kind of tapped out the number of hours Christian's willing to pay me on that. He's paying someone else to do it now. But I remember the point of this fossil. There's a big crack right here. In Antarctica, when you're going to find fossils, they don't have erosion. There's no weathering. You have to crack fossils like you're doing concretions. And when you crack a rock, it's going to break through the fossil. If you have a paper-thin articulated amphibian skeleton, when you pop that rock, it's going to go straight through the skeleton. And you're going to end up with the positive and the negative. And then your boss is going to say, that paper-thin skeleton that's now cut in 2 pieces, I need you to glue it together so that it matches up 100% fine, and then come down and prep it. But I'm under high magnification. When you glue 2 things together, there is an air pocket. There is a space. There's molecules there. A lot of glue shrinks, which makes air pockets, which means if I'm prepping down, I'm going to start shattering things. So I had to sit there and think, okay, what is a glue that's not going to shrink? What's one that's going to set real heavy? What's one that has a very, very tiny molecule that's not a polymer because it's too fat? And that was a case where I had to use super glue. Super glue doesn't shrink. Super glue is super, super tiny molecules or monomers. They don't make the polymer chain until they start to have the chemical reaction. It's a lot of nerdy stuff, but I had to make the decision to use super glue to put that back together. And super glue is not usually smiled upon in fossil prep because it's not archival, but there's no archival glue that would do that for me. It would all shrink. So it's one of those things where you go, it's a necessary evil. I do use a lot of super glue. kind of moving it back, for the things that I do in fossil prep, we gotta go back to the field work, right? People have to collect it correctly in the first place. And so when I go out into the field, I'm doing that big education component. Most of what I talk about in the field is rocks, because no one I work with is a geologist except me. And people don't have an understanding of how rock is going to move and weather under fossils. And you have to move giant blocks of rock. You have to flip them over. If you're working in loose mudstone, that mudstone is going to want to fall. It's going to crack in places you don't want. It's going to move out. And then I have people bring back completely shattered rubble triceratops skulls in loose mudstone because they didn't understand how the mudstone was formed and how it's going to break. They add weight to the wrong section. It sloughs off, etc. So on the left, I call that my Renaissance painting. My coworker shot that. I came out into the field and saw that big arch of plaster that's part of the triceratops frill. It's hanging out in space on loose mudstone. So you have this big chunk of fossil with a lot of heavyweight plaster kind of sitting out over this unstable edge. That's going to rip and fall off and take that frill with it. So I walked out there and went, what are y'all doing? And so I'm holding up underneath it some plaster bandages to make sure nothing else is going to fall under. And so what I had to do immediately was hold the bottom so nothing falls out. And then from the base of the rock, I built a pedestal up to support the weight of the block because that was going to completely rip off and break the frill. They didn't have an understanding of the weight, the geology, things like that. I was there to say, hold on, you're going to make my life miserable. Let's fix this. On the right is one that I didn't get too fast enough, and they ripped and fluffed and all sorts of things. But I had the opportunity to take a crew out to salvage that jacket and teach them proper methoding of jacketing and removal of a jacket. You can see I've got even 3 boards in that little tiny pancake because I was like, this is not going to flex. This is not, you already shattered it. Let's not shatter it more. And I try and prioritize diversity and equity in the field because when I go out into the field and I run crews, 99% of the time I'm the only female lead in the entire force. I've seen very few female field worker leads, and I know why that's a thing. That's another issue that we'll deal for another day, but there's not a lot of equity and diversity in the field. It's not a very enjoyable experience for a lot of people for multiple reasons. And so when I go out into the field, I take as many women as I can because I'm like, we need more women here. I need more women to work with me. I don't want to be the only woman in a camp of 400 men who haven't showered in 3 weeks. Like, please come out with me. So it's another component of my education is pulling in the people who are typically excluded from field work. Yes.
Say, top of your head, really correctly, isn't automatically going to take 10 times longer and cost 10 times more money to do it right as opposed to doing it wrong? You know what I mean?
It is much more cost effective if you collect it correctly the first time, 100%. And I make that argument constantly. It takes 2 seconds to damage it in the field, and that 2 seconds of damage has now created 100 hours of work in the lab. And all the materials that go into that comes out of my budget. So I get very mad when people make a tiny mistake that created so much issue for me because it's time and it's money. If they had sent half an hour to properly set up that excavation, they would have not cost that money in that time. So 100%, you save money, you save time, and you save data and research if you collect it properly the first time. And the thing that a lot of people run into in the field is laziness. They don't want to spend the half an hour it takes to properly set up and suss out a scene. They say, I want to go home. It's hot. I don't care. I'm wiped out. Let's just get it done. And then it shatters. But if they'd taken the time to do it slowly and appropriately, they're not eating up half of my budget.
Very quick question. Several of the members here collect plants. Would you address the difference in treating plant material versus raw material?
Yes, I can do that real quick right now. Treat them the same. The only caveat is maybe don't put glue on your leaf because the glue is going to change the coloration of the entire fossil. Acetone can also wipe away the carbon. So the preparation technique that we use at the Burke to prepare our leaves, it's the same tools that we're using to prepare our dinosaurs, the same air scribes. It might actually terrify some of y'all to see the way that we prep leaves. Our fastest and best leaf preparators are using Chicago pneumatics. They are massive vibrating tools. They're huge, they're overkill, and they are whipping out 15 leaves in 3 hours immaculately and perfectly because they have mastered the way that that tool hits that to make the rock pop off. And so they use the same, they're using the heavy duty dyno tools on our leaves. The only difference in that case is we don't put any adhesive or glue on our leaves unless one shatters and it's a teaching specimen and they say, Kelsie, can you fix it? We also dip our leaves in hydrofluoric acid and other things like that too. Yeah, that's a whole other thing. You can go on the website. Quick one about that, safety. Safety, Kelsie, right? I'm leading crews. I'm going out there. A lot of people, when you're doing field work, you learn from someone else. You're not necessarily thinking about safety. And I'm sitting there thinking, how am I going to get sued? So when I went out to this quarry, this is our Triceratops quarry, and this is a week worth of work. I got out there, they had dug into the quarry. The wall of the quarry was probably 15 feet high. And if you leave a straight wall of mudstone in Montana for a year, you're gonna come back and that 15-foot wall, instead of being like this, it's gonna be like that. I'm not gonna sit under here and dig up a dinosaur with all that rock up above me, like no. We did not have an excavator permit. It was ground bird nesting season, and so we had to do this with physical labor. And so I had 15 people spend 10 hours a day for literally 7 days in a row, just picking and shoveling. Some of them still do paleo. I didn't kill everyone's enthusiasm for it. You can see some of them are even grinning. The BLM guy is still kind of grinning. We had to sit there and properly terrace. And to do this properly and to do this safely, I invited out a construction safety guy from Seattle, and he sat there and educated everyone on how to properly build a bench. And we built basically an entire amphitheater around this quarry by hand. And then the next year they got the excavator permit and did everything that we did in like 2 hours. But I have to think about safety, right? Like a dinosaur is not worth dying for. Okay, we're getting close to the end. Thank you for sitting in there with me, running into that research. So I mentioned I can do my prep and do my happy thing. I can go to the field and teach them about plasters so they don't make my life miserable. And then you've already kind of heard my rant about Q-tips and the research issues. I have to talk to Christian and the researchers I work with constantly because I do not want to ruin their research. I don't want Christian to publish a paper and then have a bunch of people on Twitter say, that's not an actual feature, that's sculpted calcite that Kelsie put glue on, right? Like I don't want to be the cause of bad data or bad research. So I'm talking to them constantly. Christian's in, where is he at right now? Italy, Spain? He'll be texting me at 4 a.m., I guarantee it. And I'll be texting him back. So these are some of the publications that we've pumped out in the last couple of years. He's got students that he's publishing on these new species of animals from petrified forest. And then we've got a couple of our Gorgon papers that have come out recently. And the fun part about fossil prep, well, there's a lot of fun parts. I'm the first one that gets to see everything. I'm the one that gets to go to Christian and say, your Gorgon got eaten by another Gorgon. I'm the one that saw that and discovered that, right? So it's kind of fun. And the reason I mentioned Gorgons eating Gorgons is here's one right here. So this is a paper that came out a couple of years ago. That is the sternum of a Gorgonopsid. So those weird 250 million year old proto-mammals, if you Google them, they look like Star Wars animals. The little bits right here, boop, 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 those are all tooth marks from another Gorgon munching on that guy. Gorgons love to munch each other. All the fossils are covered bites from someone else. And then right over here, this is a stapes of a Gorgonopsid. I will go on for 4 hours about mammal ear evolution. The stapes is inside your inner ear. It's one of the bones in your inner ear, but in Gorgonopsid, it's connecting the side of the face to the middle of the mouth. It's a functional structure in the palate. And so we're looking at a lot of stapes. I've stared at a lot of Gorgonopsid stapes because they're pretty important. It's a key moment in time with the mammalian ear evolution with the lower jaw and how the lower jaw becomes the mammal inner ear. There's that Gorgonopsid. I took that photo on the left the second I saw that, and then Christian, he posts updates on Twitter or X. If you go follow him on Twitter, he's on there constantly pumping out papers, posting out photos. He's really good at getting that science communication out there. He's also a very big Gorgon nerd like me. Yes. I can't answer that. I don't know how I would tell that. That's your job. Yeah, when you go do your master's, you'll figure that out. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell behavior on a fossil. That's a difficult question. I mentioned earlier CT scanning, and so there's a lot of debate in fossil prep. So if the whole purpose of the fossil is to respect the fossil, to not manipulate it, to not change it, then the whole argument is, well, don't take it out of the rock. CT scan it. Then you don't have to manipulate it. You can get all that data that you want. You don't have to touch it. And there's a lot of contention or arguing in fossil prep that people are like, oh no, my job's going to be ruined by CT scanning and they're not going to need me anymore. I'm going to be irrelevant. No, because people like to go to museums and see fossils, not pictures of CT scans. People want to see the actual fossil. So that is something that fossils will still be prepared, right? And then the other thing is CT scanning, accurate. CT scanning is a hypothesis. It is data that is interpreted by a person. They're looking at little slices and they're going, yeah, I think that one connects to that one. Sure, that makes sense, that connects there. It's a hypothesis. It is not accurate. You have to go ground truth it. And there are a lot of fossils that have been published based on only CT data. They probably don't actually look like that. And so Christian recognizes that. I'm not saying CT is useful. We use it constantly because it tells me which direction to go in and what else is still in there. But it's not accurate and we have to ground truth it. And so this is one of my favorite examples. On the left is a CT scan of one of our Gorgonopsids, that purple bone right here. Boop, that's the stapes. And when we did the CT scan, we went, that's not right. So there's a little hole. And then there's this little nugget there that should not be there. And then there's this little flange out there that also shouldn't be there. So when we got the CT scan, Christian went, oh, that looks really weird. That's interesting. Can you go in there and suss it out? So I did. I went in there and sussed it out. Here's that little hole. And then right there is a little chunk of, we call it a floater. It's a chunk of bone that doesn't attach there, that deposited on top. It's not part of the stapes. It was interpreted in the CT scan as part of the stapes. And then there's another floater right here that's not connected to anything. So it was two floaters that got interpreted as being part of the stapes. I ended up ultimately removing both of those so we could see the entire stapes. But if we had tried to publish with that saying, oh, we have a really cool, weird looking Gorgon stapes. No, we don't. We have floaters stuck to my little stapes. And then if I can move my little screen, this is another little point of pride. I might not be able to move it. Okay. Well, it's hiding. You'll just have to trust me. The little thing right there. This stuff right there, that's my Miralax. You melt it in a microwave. You don't need to add water or anything. You melt it in the microwave for 30 seconds. It turns into liquid wax. I call it wax. If you talk to another preparator, call it a polymer. They'll yell at you. It's not a wax. It's a polymer. Christian texted me one day and he's like, I need a denary from this specific animal that we're prepping. Can you go find the best denary in the drawer and go prep it out? I need the lateral view of the denary. And so I went and found one. Denary is like this part of the jaw of a reptile. So I went and found one. It was the best one. I stuck it in my wax. I started preparing it. That thing's about this big. It's like the thickness of a potato chip. That's why I set it in wax so it doesn't break on me. And then he texted me and he's like, Kelsie, that's a left jaw that you put in dorsal view. I need lateral view. So dorsal view would be looking down. So he thinks I'm looking at the left side like that way. And I text him back. I'm like, Christian, that's a right in lateral view. And we argue about it. And then he comes in and he puts it under the microscope and he stares at it for 10 minutes and he goes, you were right. And you know why I was right? Because I spent 30 hours staring at it already. I know what it looks like better than the researcher. So preparation can really help researchers. We are noticing the things that they might not notice because we stared at it under a microscope for 30 hours. I stared at one chuvasaurid vertebrae, it's like a crocodile relative, it's weird, for 100 hours. I know that vertebra better than anyone. I can help the researcher improve their paper if they would just listen to me. Christian does, he's fine. And then again, there are actual papers about fossil preparation and conservation. A lot of it comes a lot from like the museum or art world. So art conservators and they have a degree in art conservation. But they also have a painting already that they can take care of. My job's different. I have to get the painting out of the rock to take care of it. But a lot of fossil preparators are now going, I'm going to steal all the stuff that the art preparators use, which is everything that we do use now, and use that on my fossil because all those art people wrote all the papers about what this thing is going to do in 500 years. And so there's a lot of different papers that are great that they're applying those research to the looking at the methods and that's going to affect fossils. And That's great and that's wonderful. But again, a lot of these papers are already 15 or 20 years old and they're not being incorporated into mainstream research. So there is a disconnect between the fossil preparators and the preparation and making a specimen accessible and the science and the research that is occurring. And it's because there's no communication that's bridging that gap. And so I yell at researchers constantly, talk to your preparator, ask them what they did to this. That's going to impact you. Tell them what you want to do with it. They will help you and you will have a better project at the end. So that's my whole thing. Christian has now started coming to me and saying, okay, can you write this chunk of the method section? Because last time I published, I wrote your glue wrong in the paper. So I hope you have a little bit more appreciation for the stuff that you do to fossils. And again, it's not just even to fossils. Think about everything you do in life, every glue, every tool. What is it doing? Could there be something better? Is there a better way to approach it? You can apply this to everything, right? Being a fossil preparator is a materials and methods expert. It is art and science. Art is the mastery and manipulation of a material. It's understanding how to make paint flow in the way that you want it to flow, how to dilute it, how to apply it to different surfaces. Fossil preparation is the same way, except I'm doing it with glue, right? And some other tools like, I don't even know, Miralax, right? So you need to understand what are you using, how can you play with it, what are stuff that can impact it, temperature, humidity, things like that. You need to get really nerdy about the stuff that you are applying to anything, your paintings, your fossils. When you go home, you know, if you put super glue on your fossils, it's going to fall apart on your shelf in 5 years. Maybe you don't want that to happen. So you can make a better decision and you can make your own objects in home last longer. So that's a little bit about what I do and what is important to me. I can go on for another 15 hours, but I won't. But thank you for having me. It was really cool to be here. And yeah. Whew. Day 53, so it's up to you.
I would bet there's 50 questions out there running around both on the line and person. We're at 8:53 and we've done it 9 and the business meetings can go really, really fast. Does somebody have an important question that they can't wait to email a question they want to ask?
Just a comment. We will see you there.
Awesome. I brought business cards, so I can give you my business card if you want it. It's got my contact information. If you do make it to the Burke, contact me. Contact me before you get there. I will take you back into the collections. I will talk for 3 hours about gorgonopsids and mammalian ear evolution and the hand evolution. I didn't even talk about gorgonopsid hands. So come see me. Come see my African Permian monsters. Yeah.
I know.
Please come see me. You don't even know. I'm going to be going actually the first week of June. I'm going to be in Kansas doing Cretaceous chalk, so mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, Hesperornis fish, things like that. So I'm going to go Christian to go collect those for a week in June in Kansas, and then I'm going to spend 2 weeks in Wyoming at a Morrison Formation dig. So the Jurassic dinosaurs that I got started at. I'm really excited to go to this quarry. There's sauropods. There's Allosaurus. The Allosaurus has the skull. The skull's still in the quarry. There's a articulated pterosaur neck in, like, how far is the head, like, right? So I'm really excited about that one. I'm going to spend 2 weeks on the Morrison Formation, and then I'll spend 2 weeks in Arizona in September after the monsoon season to go continue collecting Triassic animals. Good question. So I do take apprentices, but they have to be over 18 to work in my lab. Yeah, you have to be over 18. For field work, the volunteer opportunities for the field work would be the Hell Creek Project. So that's our big dinosaur site where how we get stuff like our T-Rex and our Triceratops. You have to be over 16 to do that one, but it's a lot of HR paperwork. So I prefer over 18, but we can do the HR paperwork as well. We're done and booked up for this season, but if you are interested in volunteering to do Hell Creek field work, come get my card, contact me. I'll get you the hookup next year. No guarantee. We do have like 500 people who say, can I go out? We can't take all of them. But that would be your main opportunity to do field work, would be volunteering for the Hell Creek Project. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it makes you wonder. Yeah, yeah. As an aside, the digging thing. I have brochures for a company called Ancient Odysseys that hooks you up with digs. They're pay to dig programs. They're all around the world. If you want to go to South Africa and dig up a gorgonopsid or a hominid, there's digs that you can go on. Yeah, right? Like, so I do have flyers for a pay to dig company that works only with fossil repositories, and like they're not selling fossils, they're doing actual research. So I have lots of little handouts and goodies, so come talk to me.
You guys teach fossil.
Not at the University of Washington. I taught grad level, undergrad level fossil preparation and conservation at South Dakota School of Mines. I hopefully will be teaching that soon at UW. It takes 3 years to get a class into their like turnover rate, and I don't have the forethought to plan 3 years ahead to get a class going, but maybe one day. Most of the teaching that I do is informal workshops on weekends for volunteers.
I was just gonna say, do you do any teaching at Burke?
Tons, constantly. A lot of it's workshops for my volunteers.
So, one just tiny. Do you ever flash back to fossil prep while you're brushing your
I don't.
teeth?
I don't want to know what I'm doing to my teeth.
With the fossil prep, toothpaste or
On a tooth? Why?
getting them- Oh,
We don't use toothpaste. There's a lot of chemicals in toothpaste. Usually whatever we're using, we want one chemical because it's one variable to figure out. The second you add a lot of chemicals to something, they're going to interact and you don't know how they're going to decay. So that's the quick way of saying no to toothpaste, but also we have more fun, more deadly chemicals to play with.
Did you address air braiding?
Yes, aeration will ruin your tooth. I have one master's student who published on low magnification microware, where she did before and after with baking soda and completely obliterated and made new features. And then JP also at the same time did a SEM study, so much higher magnification, where he before and after sandblasted teeth. And in both cases, the original marks are completely gone and there are completely new ones made, telling you if someone came back and didn't have the records from someone sandblasting the teeth and then came up with a dietary reconstruction, they're coming up with the baking soda marks.
What's the best stuff to use? Baking soda, dolomite?
I use baking soda constantly. I pull out dolomite for like concretions if I have to, but mostly baking soda.
Ask if there's any. So I'm sure there's people online also that like to ask questions. What I'm going to invite everyone to do is we'll send out the email on the listserv and ask your questions online. And thank you so much for your time on this. It's fantastic. Yep. All right.